Hello, friends. Welcome to a very, very special episode of Unsung Heroes. I'm Chris Gordon, and we've been spending the last few weeks celebrating the life and the music of Matthew Bradley, a phenomenal musician and an amazing person. And I am extremely excited and honored to welcome Matt's longtime partner, confidant, soulmate. I mean, technically speaking, they were husband and wife. And I'm very happy to welcome Nadine Gray.
Salutations.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a long time since you and I have seen each other. I believe it was in the early 90s in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that part of Matt's life. I'm really interested, obviously, in you and Matt meeting, but your background is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
You were with the PA Ballet,
right?
Pennsylvania Ballet.
Pennsylvania Ballet. Mm-hmm.
So let's, there we go. Let's talk about that a little bit. What got you into ballet? Where did it start for you?
It started with basically my mother was one of the original principal dancers of the Pennsylvania Ballet in the 60s.
Wow.
I just happened to have the talent. I had the body, I had the feet, I was just a good looking dancer. And you look for a model, meaning the way you should be and your feet and how everything relates to each other. And I went to audition and I got a full scholarship for my entire life with Pennsylvania Ballet. And then I was always the person that got pulled in. If somebody fell down the stairs at the Academy of Music and had an injury, or if they got sick or something, I was always the one that went in last minute to rehearse and then pick up the role. So the company started seeing that here's this girl who's not been cast in the ballet, but she's picking up the steps with a day advance notice. That's it. And then performing. So I think I might have mentioned to you that it was the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, the ballet, and the curtain closes and I'm standing there waiting to get yelled at. And they're like, they handed me a contract. And I was a junior in high school and I graduated high school that year and moved on. And I was full-time professional ballet dancer. Wow. I did lots of ballets. I can tell you lots of stories there too. Totally different life than the music life, but there's the artistic appreciation.
Well, sure. And I had worked with First State Ballet as an assistant music director for some of the pieces that they did. And I have to say, hanging out with these dancers and just the intense discipline.
Yes.
It was insane.
Well, you don't have a life. I mean, you start at like age 5, 6 to take class and you're there 6 days a week, two classes a day. As you get older, you're in point shoes by age 10.
Wow.
You're taking class in your point shoes, not just a point class. These aren't recitals. These are full-on rehearsals and full-on performances at the Academy of Music.
Yeah.
You have to learn about raked stages and what a raked stage means. You have to learn classical music in the sense of anticipating if this conductor is going to go really fast,
right?
How am I going to fit my feet into that? There's a lot. And I also played in the youth orchestra. I played the cello when I was younger.
Oh, wow. That's something I did not know.
Yeah.
Okay.
My dad played the cello, my mother played the violin, and I played the cello, and we had a little trio going on.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then at one point, the ballet school said, you have to choose. It's either the cello or ballet. And I said, ballet it is. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And you said junior high. So you were handed a contract at 16?
Yeah, 16, 17. Yeah, I was handed a contract. And it was like right then and there, my whole life that I knew as a young teenager just stopped. I was at the studio all day, rehearsing, taking class. And then it was a whirlwind. I mean, it was a very cool whirlwind, but a difficult life. You don't have a life outside of ballet. I mean, all your friends are in the ballet. There is no going to a club. There is no hanging out per se. It's just very different. People, they're very close-knit.
Right. So this is interesting because you're talking about this discipline with ballet and this extraction from what would be considered a normal life.
Right.
And then you meet Matt, who in a lot of ways had self-imposed that.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to that time, like when
Okay.
you met Matt. How did and I got full of, I guess, so many questions. How did you meet him, and what was your first impression?
Okay. So my best friend Roseanne was in the ballet school and I was in the company. And she was like a rock and roll girl. She had two sisters, one older, one younger, and they were all pretty much in the scene, like going to the Empire Rock Club and
Wow.
being at all those places. So they would drag me along. I'm like, I really don't like this. I don't fit in. I mean, you remember me way back when. I kind of was like the sore thumb in the room. I just did not fit into this rock and roll lifestyle. So she was sort of kind of dating somebody that lived at Donnie Buffalo's house.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's history here. So Matthew dated Robin Buffalo, which is Donnie's sister, and he moved into Donnie Buffalo's basement. And when Matt and Robin broke up, I happened to be at the house with my friends, just hanging out, not knowing what was going on. I really didn't want to be there. I think I had to drive them. That's why I was there.
Okay.
And up comes this guy from the basement, this tall, skinny, blonde guy. I'm like, who in the hell is that? And I think I said hi, like spitting and like stammering. And then he's like, hey, Matt, bubbly, bouncing on his feet. And
Yeah.
and then he was carrying like amps and he was just unloading all his stuff out of the house. And then there was like a show, I want to say maybe a week or two later. And I'm like, I got to find this guy. Where is this? Where does he live? Who knows this guy? And he was playing in a band with Robin and Joey and Alana. So this goes way back before Mask. It might have been right during Mask, but they had, I want to call it the Death, Destruction, Kill Your Parents night. So it was at this nightclub. It was like a dive somewhere in, I don't know, the sticks of either Jersey or PA. We drove forever to get there with Joy, Roseanne, and I. And I'm like, I don't want to be here. It was like dirty, grungy. And we were right close to the stage. There was no room left to sit. And there's Matt. And I'm like, oh my God, he looked just like that. And I'm like, this is meant to be. This is absolutely meant to be. And I don't know if I talked to him after the show, but I kept seeing him. So then every time I saw him, he's like, oh, hey, we keep waving at each other. And then before you knew it, we just started hanging out and going out. And I think our first date was at a vegan restaurant on South Street. That's long gone. Vegan.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're going back when you first saw him. This was a visceral reaction.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, this is it. Signed, sealed, delivered. The bus stopped. The bus stopped right then and there.
Oh, that's great.
I had nobody else. I could not see anybody else. That's all I saw. My whole world was Matt at that point. And
wow.
Yeah, he was like a black hole, very consuming, and in a good way and a bad way. But he was a sort of personality. He had this sort of personality where you didn't want to walk away from him. You kind of always wanted to be in his presence. And he, even though was a musician, he had so much to give in his understanding of musicality and playing that he was just a plethora of information. I mean, it was exciting to talk to him because he knew a little bit about everything. So he was kind of like a jack of all trades.
Right.
But when we first started going out, it was kind of rough going because Matt had just broken up with Robin and he was really into like the music scene and I was in the city. So I wasn't in the music scene. So it was kind of hard to kind of hook up in that. And then he invited me to a couple of the shows and I went and that was it. It was like, that was it. Nadine and Matthew are together. And then I started meeting everybody. And then I think before you knew it, so this created an issue because of the ballet. So I couldn't go to a lot of the shows because I was either performing or rehearsing or had to be up early or I was on tour. We moved in, gosh, not even 6-9 months after that, we started living together. So first I kind of moved in when he was living in Swarthmore with his parents. So they had converted their office into Matt's bedroom. And I was just there all the time. His parents loved me because I was like the 1% of the population that can dance. And the way they saw that is, you can learn to sing, you can learn to, play an instrument, but not everybody can dance like the way I danced and look good at it. So anybody can learn to dance, but the difference is, do you look good at it while you're doing it and getting paid for it? So they loved talking to me, and the theater. Matt loved, he loved sneaking backstage. He got me in a lot of trouble, but he would sneak backstage through the green room.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this, if it's the same in music. So on a stage, you have wings, right?
Yes.
And so the adage is, if you can see the audience, if you're peeking your big old head out from behind that wing, if you can see the audience, they can see you.
They can see you.
So it's a big fat no-no. So here's Matt, Sergeant Stripes, and he's taking it all in, and head sticking clear out of the wing. And I'm like, oh my God, Matt. And I'm like dancing on stage, like turning my head like, go, get out. You're going to get me in trouble. And sure enough, by the close of curtain, the director came down and I got fined. And he's like, he's not allowed back here. He's not part of the ballet, make sure that doesn't happen again. So they put a lock on the door, but he found a way in. He would always come and watch me. Not in class, only during performances.
And that's the fascinating thing, I think, too, is that there was that reciprocating idea of these two artists that were kind of driving each other, I think. Yeah. And with Matt, I always felt that he took everything in, but he internalized it to be able to bring it back out in an artistic way. So I have even from some of the pieces of music that I was involved with, I can see that connection between your ballet dancing and the ballet discipline and his discipline to
yes, absolutely. And you mentioned, how he would take things in and then share them. So he would suck up everything he heard. Yeah. Grace Jones being one. I introduced him to Grace Jones. So he would take a beat from that. Or if you listen to some of his songs, you totally clearly hear the Bullet Boys, but maybe the Bullet Boys heard it from him. So there's, you know what I mean? It flows. It's kind of like what he called the 100th monkey syndrome, that everybody comes up with the same thing at the same time. But yeah, I mean, he took little bits of everything. Jane's Addiction. Who else was around that time? Bauhaus, Eerie Sounds. And then Eddie Van Halen. I mean, how many people do you know that can pick up a guitar and play almost as good as Eddie Van Halen? Not many people. I mean, his discipline towards that. And I remember when he was teaching lessons, all the little kids are coming in like, oh, I want to learn how to play this. I want to play that Metallica song. And he's like, dude, man, remember him saying that? Dude, man, you got to start from the beginning. You got to start with the lessons. You got to start with, repeat. Then you can add on to that. But he was a stickler for that, learning the basics, practicing all the time, practicing when you drive, practicing wherever.
Well, that was his influence on me, because I went to Top 10 to replace him on his recommendation. He says, I'm not going to teach anymore. Right. Working on this record deal, bringing Chris Gordon. So I came in, and I remember the day I came in, that's exactly what you just said. Yeah. Dude, man, no. And he was yelling at this student. Yeah. And I was very young then, and I didn't know that you could actually do that. You could sit there and lambast a kid. Yeah. But the student was so appreciative. He was like, oh, wow, you're right. I didn't think of that,
Well, and I'll tell you, if that student followed Matt and knows about Matt, knew about Matt, and is watching this right now, he's going to know that we're talking about him. And he's going to say, you know what? That dude, man, was right. Yeah. Because Matt's not going to teach you the song that's 5 years down the road. He's going to teach you what you need to know to develop your skills to get there. Right. And he was really an intense player. He was intense about his love for music. He was intense about how he heard and perceived things, and how he was able to transfer them into his music. Right. Oftentimes, I think somebody had mentioned that Matt was ahead of his time, maybe too ahead of his time. Yep. And there's some validity in that he was all over the map at the same time. Yeah. You couldn't pin him down to any one sound. It was always morphing. And he seemed not so to be liquid as a person, but his music was very liquid. It was always kind of flowing in different areas, but the intensity was always there. And I don't know if you remember, Matt, in those days in our apartment in the city, we converted the bedroom into his studio, and he would go in that studio. I wouldn't see him for days, and he would be up for days on end recording and trying to figure stuff out. And then people would come in and record and then leave. And I'm like, it's like a inside joke, but it's not really, because I think everybody that hears this is going to know what it was like to record and do things with Matt. And then Matt involved me in some of the early songs. I want to say it was Mask, but it could have been Street Talk. He had me do some voicing on some songs, and I was so sheepish and afraid to do anything. He's like, "Oh, come on, sweetie, you can do it." And I think it was John Eskridge that shared that song with me on an MP3. I'm like, "Oh my God, that goes so far back."
Wow.
And it was kind of weird to see, and it was weird to hear Matt's voice. And then he started introducing different. I don't even know how you people find this stuff. It's like Matt Bradley's all over, YouTube and all over these places, and he'll send me these blurbs, and I'm like, "That's Matt. Oh my God, that's Matt. Wow, that's Matt." And how he changed. Do you remember he was only a guitarist, and then he decided he wanted to sing, and then he loved Sting so much and Mark King from Level 42 that he started playing the bass, and then he was obsessed about the bass. So I mean, he was really a jack of all trades in regard to being a musician, but intense guy.
So you were with him when he started to sing, because as you said, he was a guitar player.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, he played guitar for Pretty Poison.
Yes, he was with Pretty Poison. I don't know if he was with them for long term. That was kind of a crazy situation. But he played with Pretty Poison. So what year was that? 84, 85?
Before I knew him, but I was aware of that.
Yeah, Pretty Poison. It was like the one-hit wonder of Philly, although everybody loves Jade Starling. But he was playing with Way Cooler, that's not his real name, and Tony Romeo, as he's known. And Tony, I call him Tony Romeo. He lives in Brazil currently, but he came to California to work with Matt.
Yes.
And I don't really know, because there was a lot of talk about record deals and shelving and points and this and that. I don't know exactly how everything kind of collapsed and why people started leaving. I don't even know why you left and what happened. It was just kind of like really chaotic at that time.
Well, it was also during the riots.
Oh, God. Yeah, you guys all went home. I was stuck there.
Yeah, we came back to get my car.
Yeah. Oh, my
and
God.
We actually drove into the riots.
Yeah, I remember because Matt called, and I'm like, "Do not drive in the city. There's a curfew. You're going to get." Oh God, that was wow.
But I had hung out with Tony. Tony and I had hung out a few nights. And, phenomenal musician as well.
Yes.
One of the few that could, take, because Matt had written the bass parts, and Tony was like, and that was amazing to watch for me, to watch a musician come in who could actually, because not only was I a fan of Matt, I was unbelievably intimidated by his ability and his talent. And Tony came in and was just like, "Okay, I'll play that part. We'll do this. We'll make that happen." It was a great time. But so you were there when he started to sing. So this is a thing. This is interesting because Matt, guitar player, very accomplished, phenomenal. As you said, he had the Eddie thing going, but it was still him. Yes. But he still had that, he had a swagger to his playing. A lot of people didn't have that. He had a swagger to his playing.
You knew. You could tell immediately when it was Matt playing the guitar. You just knew.
And it was cool because he kind of married those disciplines which is probably a discipline which was inspired by you. This, classical ballet is very exacting. It's very
exacting,
intense,
but also like on the front beat or the back beat, like that.
Yeah. So I think that was a lot between the two of you. Was that I think that you fed each other in that regard, and he had this kind of beautiful swagger. But you were there, when he finally got behind a microphone to sing.
Okay, so
what was that like?
It was. I want to say it was Bill Ashton that said, "Dude, just front the band." So Matt was not the best singer. He didn't have the range or the voice that, you would want to see at the front of a band. Now, his sister, Annie,
Yes.
has a voice of an angel. She could sing. She's got pipes on her. That girl can sing. So, she's giving him pointers, but she's in New York doing her own thing. So then we get Matt vocal lessons. So he has this one woman that's teaching him. He had to learn how to breathe and how to hold his breath and all this stuff in the Alexander method, and then not just belting out sounds, learning to work with his vocal range. And it took a while for him to catch on. But then before you knew it, everywhere Matt went, Matt was singing. I'm sure you remember that. Yep. He was always singing. If it was the, Baloney Has a First Name song, he was singing it. I mean, anything and everything. So, yeah, but I remember paying for the lessons, kind of sitting in the waiting room while he's having the lessons and then hearing, because being in the orchestra, you're around a lot of this. And in high school, I actually transferred to a private or charter school after performing arts where you're learning opera. So you're understanding how breathing really does affect how the sound of your and the quality of your voice. So, between the teacher and me going with Matt and trying to explain to him the theory behind why you not holding your breath, but you're breathing from your diaphragm. It took a while for Matt to catch it, but he did. And then I think there was an interview, I think it might've been with Chris, like, there's ways to get around not having those high notes. You can kind of edge your way up, and that's using your tool, as they called it, your vocal tool. But then it was he was singing and playing bass. And I mean, he was doing really everything. So Bill came in, Bill was a bass player. Then I know Tyrone was with them for a long time. Then Chris was with them. Mm-hmm. Then somebody, I don't recall, was playing drums after Tyrone. And then so there was Pretty Poison, then Mask broke up, then Street Talk. Then Street Talk had like a little timeout. And then, I don't know if anybody knows this, Matt played with Anvil Bitch. So they were the heavy metal band of Philadelphia. They had a cool sound. They had a deal, and they got rid of their singer and they wanted Matt. Matt had the energy to front the band like that. They were pretty funny. They were very tongue in cheek for heavy metal. Okay. But I said, Matt, that's not you. It's not your personality. It's not showing your range. It's not showing what you can do. I mean, these guys are just thrashing behind you. You don't even have the head to like be bobbing like that, thrashing his head. And I mean, they were crazy. They were a lot of fun. But so then he was there. We went on a brief tour with them, and he's like, you're right, this is not me. So he ended it. And then I want to say he started dabbling around recording. I think he was talking with Mike Varney a lot in San Francisco. Yep. And there's that I want to say Sean Tierney. I could be wrong about that, about deals and, who's doing what. And then Street Talk came to be, and I don't remember what year. That had to have been like 1989, 1990.
It was 90, because I was working with Mark. I was working with Mark Hafer, and I was over his house, and he started talking about, because I knew Kevin.
Right. Oh, I love Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kevin was still with Andrea, who I went to school with Andrea. Andrea and I were childhood friends.
She was so cool.
And she would come over and hang out, and Kevin would come with her from time to time. So I knew Kevin, but I wasn't like super close with him.
Right.
But, I knew him. And then I'm over Mark's house one day, and he starts talking about, we got a new singer. And he starts explaining this singer to me. And he's like, he's got the range of Tony Arnell, but he plays guitar like Eddie Van Halen. And I said, sounds like you got Matt Bradley. And he looks at me and goes, that's who it is. And I said, oh, wow. Well, we were opening for Street Talk at the Galaxy at that time regularly. So I was there on Matt's first show with Street Talk. Yeah. And I mean, it was, I like I said, I fell off the bar stool. Like, I'm like,
right. I mean, they I think it's more so the brilliance of Matt and his bands is that just the way the music was put together and the sounds, it's not just, this is a great song. It was like, you can hear there's intelligence behind it. and the thought process behind the music. And Matt would play or encourage anybody to play, but when it came to the end of the day, when he was doing his own thing, he would only play with good players. He was not a snob in the sense, but he would only play with good players. He wouldn't have some kid that just learned how to play guitar coming over to jam with him or rehearse or practice, whatever. Yeah. He was very particular about that. I'm sure you remember that.
I do remember that. And I think I said this in a previous interview where I said that working with Matt Bradley was a lot like getting an apprenticeship with Frank Zappa.
Yes.
Because he was that, as you said, I think you coined it perfectly. He was ahead of himself.
Yeah.
He was ahead of everything.
Yeah.
And even the material that he had written when we were in Los Angeles, I knew it then. I'm listening to this stuff going, this is.
But it's almost like you don't know where to put it. It's right. Not radio play. It's, not like a Pat Metheny sort of album.
Right.
Where is this going to go? How is it going to be, not advertised, but how is it going to get the following? How's it going to get out there? Because what was the outlet then?
Right.
Everyone's trying to get on radio. That wasn't radio play. Maybe one or two songs were okay for radio. But when you think about it, all the music that he was playing, it was not anything other than, you buy the record, you go home and you sit and you're like thinking about, wow, this guy's really good. And then trying to dissect what it is that he's doing. Yeah. Right. So he was a crazy guy that way. I mean, he was good at everything.
You were so close with that in his process, in his writing process, in his daily process. So walk us through a day with Matt Bradley. Nadine and Matt, what was a typical day for you two? And we're going to compartmentalize this. Typical day in Philly.
Yeah.
And then give us a typical day on the West Coast.
Oh God. Okay. So Philly he was still working district photo or had random jobs, and he would get up early, and then I was still either working or in the ballet. So I had my own thing going on, and we'd meet kind of at the end of the day, but it would be, he's in, he's out. I almost never saw him, even though I was with him and went places with him. He was always on the move. He was always out with somebody. He was always meeting with somebody. He was always rehearsing someplace else. And then the few minutes that he's home, I mean, it was just like a fly in a fly swatter, really. I mean, he was not what you would expect to be, like the homebody. He was not a homebody. That's a good way of putting it. He was all music all the time. And, sometimes you don't want to talk about music, you just don't. And then moving to LA, now that was a tough nut, because we moved to LA. Matt was living with Tyler, and we had no place. So the first few days, weeks, we were living with Tyler, and, go try and find an apartment in LA that's a reasonable price in a good area. So then you remember we had the apartment either above him or below Tyler.
It was above him. It was on Toluca Avenue.
So we had that big old apartment, and it was just like nobody knew what they were doing. I think Matt knew the music and what he was doing, but me, I'm in culture shock. Did you go through culture shock when you got to California?
Matter of fact, the very first thing that happened, the very first morning after landing, I went outside, being East Coast.
Yeah.
And I see these two women.
Yeah.
It appeared to me that they were pushing a car. And I said, hey, do you need some help? And they looked at me and they're like, we're stretching. We're about to go jogging. And that, that kind of set the tone. I'm like, yeah. Culture shock. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. It's pretty not granola. San Diego's granola. LA is just kind of like hippy dippy and who's teaching Pilates today? It's like, whatever, it's a totally different lifestyle. And being from the East Coast, we move a lot quicker. I mean, conversations move quickly. Yeah. You move on the street quickly. It's get the hell out of my way or you're going to get run right over. So going to California, dealing with people from California, it's like, you make a phone call, like I'm expecting this call back any minute. Like that's the way we do things. Right. California, it's like, 2 weeks roll by and then you get a call back. And that was so frustrating for Matt as well as me, because their reaction time was so much slower. Like they're in this little bubble. California living is like living in a bubble. There's no reality here.
Well, it's interesting. I remember when I was there, the quote that I heard Matt say a lot was, "Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen. Got to make it happen."
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, he was, and I'm, makes sense with the way his mind was. He was constantly working,
He was driven.
So driven on, and it wasn't just, driven business wise. Absolutely. Yeah. I saw that, but
right.
I also saw this drive in him where it was almost like an idea musically was inspired, but it was a demon that he needed to get out.
Yes.
And he would spend hours on that one idea because it literally was like, I have to extract this.
Yes. Like I said, he had demons of his own breeding, but excuse me. He would get a thought in his head and then he would have to expand, like a black ball. It would have to just grow and he would grow it in every stage. And it was pretty interesting how that whole thing worked out, because half the time you knew what he was talking about and half the time you really just didn't know what he was talking about or what he was doing and what was driving him. And it was just, sometimes you just felt like you were in the room with sheer chaos.
So how did you process that yourself when that would happen, those moments? How would you?
I try and talk to him, and then being a couple for so long, we'd bicker, and then I'd be like, whatever, talk to the hand, and I would walk away. Like, you're gonna do your thing, you're not gonna listen to me, so I'm just gonna go take a walk. And that's the best thing. You don't go toe to toe with Matt Bradley.
Okay.
You don't. I had such respect for him that I kind of did not egg him on and didn't poke at him, because he pokes back, and he pokes back. So the respect I have was knowing how far pushing him can go and how many questions I could ask in regard to something before he got super frustrated and just shut you down. He had patience with me. He would explain to me when he was remember that lovely guitar he had for years, the brown one that was sanded.
Yeah.
He had that forever. That was his baby. And he didn't like the action on it. So before you know it, the whole thing's apart on the floor. He's sanding that thing with no ventilation in the room. The whole house is covered in dust. He's tweaking all sorts of stuff. And he's explaining to me, this is what that action sounds like. And he'd be like twanging on the strings. And I'm like, action. Okay. Note to self, action. And then we're back and pickups. And like, what's a pickup? And he's like flipping the guitar over trying to tell me. And I remember him pouring wax in it or some crazy. I have no idea what he was doing. But he was fine with me. But I don't think he always had the patience for everybody else. But hard to say. If he wanted something from you, he definitely had the time for you.
Yeah. He was great at getting things out of people, and you worked for it,
Yeah, and the thing, you say that, and it's true, but it's in a good way. If you worked with Matt, you knew you couldn't slack. There was no sitting around on your ass and doing nothing.
Right.
You were going to work. It was almost like you had to work to be with Matt at that caliber, because he really, if you think about it, you may have come into play with Matt being a really good guitarist, but you probably walked away being an even better guitarist afterwards, because he contributes so much in skill and technique. I don't know how you feel about that.
I absolutely agree. I walked away. I think I walked into Matt's world as a guitarist. I walked out of Matt's world as a musician.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a good way of saying it.
And I began to hear different things. And,
yes.
Especially learning drum programming from him and stuff.
He was like a genius. If you think back, so we lived in, what's his name? Chris Madden. They had that beautiful Tudor on Shadeland Avenue. And he wanted, I don't know why, we ended up living in the basement. They had the butler apartment down there. So the two
Okay.
of us are in a room that's the size of a bathroom. The whole thing is rigged out with all of Matt's equipment. And he would just be in there. I'm thinking Matt and drums, you know, it just didn't relate to me, but he's got the drum machine. He's on that thing night and day.
Yeah.
But the 4-track, so nobody could afford an 8-track or anything in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a fairly decent 4-track. And I don't know how he was doing. He was laying back, laying off, laying here, laying there, and all these tracks. He was getting a 4-track with all this drum crap. It sounded like it was a studio production, and people were really blown away. Like, not a lot of people can do that. And given the equipment at the time, it was pretty impressive. But I live with it, so it was hard for me to look and say, "Wow, that's great." Other than just say, "Oh, Matt, you're really cool. Yay, I'm going to go to."
And you were also there with him. Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely. With you know, he was so ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Even on the technical end of things, you know, I've spoken about that in the past, where his 4-track demos sounded like 16-track,
Yes,
32-track productions. Yeah. And then even today, with people, with a lot of artists that have the computers, in the home studios, they're still not capturing what he was able to capture on 4-track.
Yes.
1/4-inch tape, mind you.
Yes, I know. And I worked in the film business, so I know about these tapes, and I know where your optical track is, and I know it all. But you know, if you think about it, musically speaking, what you guys did then 20, 30 years ago, and these kids with these new, you know, Apple computers, it's the computer that's driving the music, not necessarily the person. The musicality is just not there.
Right.
The skill level is not there. The ability to really discern different sounds, because you're up close and you can feel the bass drum, or you can feel the bass itself, like the feeling that you have, and correlating that to your ear and how to take that in and how to work with it. I mean, that's lost now. That really is lost, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think Matt even then knew what he wanted to hear, and I think that's where it came down to, is like the ears, and okay, I'm limited with this technology, but I'm going to maximize this technology.
And he absolutely did. And his parents were a godsend, in that, you know, I paid for a lot. I bought him a lot of stuff because I knew it was his passion. We wanted Matt Bradley happy. We wanted Matt Bradley to be, you know, fiddling with something. What do they say? The idle hands or something.
The devil's work.
Yeah. Keep him busy. And his parents really embraced his artistry and allowed him whatever he needed. He would say, "I need this," and then Ben would go buy it for him. So, you know, that was nice. That took some of the responsibility off my back. But you remember, he had all that equipment, and he would buy it, and he would be there for a day. And by the end of the day, he knew the ins and outs of that thing.
Yep.
Like, it was mind-blowing. It really was mind-blowing. I mean, like I said, I was so close to him, I didn't see it. And when I took the step back years later, I'm like, damn, you know, I really wish I had stopped to truly appreciate him as a musician, and all that he didn't have and worked to have, meaning skill set wise. He was the cat's meow in my world. He really was the cat's meow. Many people don't know this, that he was groomed to be a professional tennis player.
That's right. There was a country club that.
Yes.
Okay.
There were several country clubs. So when they lived in Long Beach Island, there was the yacht club, and they had all sorts of stuff there. And there was another country club adjacent to it. So he was taking lessons, and somebody noticed him. So then ball boys are, you know, you play tennis, the ball's airing, it hits the net, it falls in front. And there's a kid that darts out in front of the net, pick up the ball and run off. So apparently that's very prestigious. I always thought, well, that's too bad for that guy. You know, like I wouldn't want to be running around there, but people noticed him, and he was groomed, and then he had all those injuries. So he had, I don't know if you remember, he jumped off the roof. So he was playing Frisbee with his sister. Frisbee goes up on the roof. Matt climbs up on the roof, falls off, breaks his leg. that's when he started playing really intense guitar. He must have been like 10 years old.
Yeah, okay.
And then I think he broke his other leg skateboarding. And then he was working, I want to say, in a pet store, and they were mixing, for God knows why, mixing chemicals, and he had those, it exploded, and his hands and wrists were cut.
Wow.
And it took him forever. And that's when he got really good with the guitar, because he had to get his fingers back. So he learned to work because they were numb. I mean, he didn't have that ability. So,
oh, wow.
That's when he just sat there. I mean, one broken leg, the hands are bad. He just sat there and played guitar.
And Matt was left-handed, right?
Matt was left-handed, but he was ambidextrous, and he would.
But he learned to play right-handed.
Yes, so he said any guitar player that plays left-handed is a loser. They're selling out, and everybody should learn how to play guitar the right way. Wow. And I don't know what his point was with that, because there are a lot of left-handed people that play, but he said you should flip it over. You should be playing this way, and he did, and he was ambidextrous, so I guess it was easier for him than others. But
wow,
I don't know. I remember one summer on District Photo, he never liked Jimi Hendrix, but got a bee in his bonnet about this one song. I can hear it in my head, but I don't know what it is, and I wasn't a Jimi Hendrix fan. So he had his knee on the steering wheel, the guitar on his lap, a tape, because we didn't have CDs then. This is how far back we go. He's got this one song of Jimi Hendrix on the tape deck. So he's trying to learn it. He's almost not even looking at the road. He's driving with his knee. He's got one foot on the pedal, and he's playing Jimi Hendrix. And I'm like, oh my God, and he wouldn't stop until he got it. And then finally it was like, hallelujah, in the car. He screamed. He got it. It was this one song. Do you remember him ever playing the Jimi Hendrix song? Because I asked him later in life, what was that Jimi Hendrix song you were like going crazy over? It was really, really an intricate.
Yeah, it might have been Dolly Dagger, because I know what you're talking about. There was this, and I think it was off Electric.
Fingers down.
Yeah, it was off of Electric Ladyland. And I remember that was one of the things we were even talking about, the fact that he was left-handed,
right,
and had learned to play it this way.
Yeah,
he had this unbelievable, strong, rhythmic intuition that a lot of people couldn't pick up on. But he was doing that with the Hendrix tune. He's like, he's like,
But he heard things in a different way, But when rhythmically speaking, yes, he was a creature. I mean, totally different in that sense. But a lot of it was, again, hearing and the feeling, that backbeat. And I understood what a backbeat was, because you would dance either on the front beat or the backbeat. Mm-hmm. So I tried to correlate that to music in the way he would emphasize on the backbeat or the downbeat. Yep. And it was interesting to hear the difference in what that sounded like. So his perception of sound was pretty astute in regards to that, and his rhythm and just the way his brain functioned.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, he was hearing final products long before we did.
Yeah.
Yeah. He'd be working on a part, and we're listening going, okay.
Every day was a mystery with him, because he'd spent the day or the week before you saw him just all day, all night working on that.
Yeah. So I remember that there would be nights, especially when you two were living in Philly, and he would be at Top 10.
Yeah.
And he would just spend 3 days at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not go home.
Right. No, I drew the line. So he kind of partially moved into the basement of Top 10. And I'm like, I draw the line at that. No. So then I got the apartment in the city, but he was pretty much living at Top 10.
Yeah.
And he was doing his lessons, and I don't know what was the allure other than his friends were all there. And then I don't know, I think it was when he was solicited by Vinnie Moore that he left, or was?
No, what happened, well, from my memory, was I was teaching that day. I believe it was a Saturday, and you're right, he was living down there, and he had been recording, with Street Talk.
Uh-huh.
So Street Talk would get him tracks, and then he would go down into, for days.
Right.
And so I'm in my lesson room. I just got done with the student.
That little team.
That little closet.
Yeah.
I'm in there,
Mm-hmm.
And Matt is on the phone with Mike Varney.
Yeah.
And he starts yelling at him yelling at him, like
Yeah.
full Matt mode, upset. I'm like,
Oh,
I
and
poke my head out,
that.
and he says, "Listen, Mike, I don't want to hear you talk anymore. Do you want to do a deal,
or not?
or do you not want to do a deal? Because I got other things I got to do."
Yes, you can totally. Can't you? I can totally hear that. I can
And a
totally
week
hear that.
later, they were gone.
What happened? Exactly.
Yeah.
Matt was always a squeaky wheel, but he did it in such a way that he wasn't annoying. I mean,
Well, he was
really,
endearing because there was that passion. You know?
yeah. And the passion is a large part of being artistic. You can dance, you can play guitar, but when you do it with such passion and you can feel it. I mean, it's in you, it's in your heart. There's such a difference than just picking up an instrument and playing it. I mean, he had it there. It was here with him.
No, it was there. So in Los Angeles, you continued on. I think I disappeared to San Francisco at that point. But talk about your relationship post, so we're in the early 90s.
Yeah.
What happened?
So Matt moved to California. He was living in the Bay Area and recording for Varney, and that's where that whole Warner Brothers deal started.
Right.
And I came out and visited him several times, and he was there for, I want to say, a year, and I was still in Philly, and I was in college, and we made the plans for me to finish up school, and then in January, which is when I moved to California, January of 92, then we would go on with our lives. And I transferred to USC to do post-baccalaureate studies there. So I had something to do. I just didn't have a job. And I had Matt, which was like a big baby because I had to take care of everything, all of minutia. It was tough going then because, I mean, LA was such a different world for us. And the break, I would have lived in San Francisco if we could, but Mike Varney had us come down for Warner Brothers.
Okay.
I mean, you remember, it's just the culture shock, the way people move and the distance. You can't walk on a street and go from one block to the other. It was just so different. And there's no going back. Once you're here, you don't go back because then you're going back with your tail between your legs. So we kind of stuck it out. But Matt was back and forth several times to Philly. I don't know why. Was it equipment or was it that pinball machine? Flash. You remember that pinball machine we had?
Yeah.
Flash Gordon. Yeah, we had a pinball machine. So I think he might have gone back to the pinball machine. I can't remember. But he was back and forth, and it was just getting to the point where, Street Talk fell apart because that had more to do with points on the record with Warner Brothers than anything else. And they could not get along. And then Warner Brothers shelved them. So then Matt, you were probably there when Matt had the studio on Van Nuys, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That little hole.
Yep.
And I think that's when Doug was playing.
Yes.
Yeah. And who else? It was Matt, you, Doug.
Doug and Tony came in.
Tony came in.
Yeah. And
then Tony, I don't know why, he just wasn't down with it after a point. It just got too silly with Doug. It just became like a joke almost. And then it was right around that time. I'm just like, you're never home. You come and go. You take the cat. You take the equipment. I don't know what to expect from you. And he was kind of heading into that, I don't want to say reckless, but kind of bad behavior.
Okay.
And I couldn't rein him in. I was trying to work and go to school and get stuff done. And it just kind of, everything fell apart. And I think when the record deal fell apart, Matt fell apart, we fell apart. He went back east, and then the demons of his own breeding came to surface. And then I was just like, I have to take a break from you for a while because you can't talk to somebody when they're in that. He's so passionate. You talk about his passion in music and all the things he does. Well, he was passionate about that too. Yeah. And there's no talking. You can't talk to a passionate person who's really just set in one way.
Right.
But LA was hard. I don't know how I managed to stay it out. He went home, he came back, and he went to Claremont. So when he came back, he had to really clean up. And I remember going to see him in Claremont, and he was kind of like a new man, but he didn't have the burden of of music, the burden of putting stuff together, the burden of making things happen. And I think that is what he needed all along, to be kind of in the driver's seat to make things happen. Because if he didn't make it happen, it wasn't happening.
Right.
And that's the reality. And I don't know, were you in touch with him when he was in Claremont? Because there was a bunch of people in and out from there.
Yeah, I didn't reconnect with Matt until about 2011.
Oh, so that's okay.
Yeah, so there was a gap.
Yeah.
I mean, I connected with him in, I think it was when one of his visits back east.
Right.
We did some brief work together. He moved his studio into my place at the time in New Jersey. I was living in the Pine Barrens.
Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. I retreated. And he moved his studio in. He kept it there for 2 weeks. I recorded some tracks with him, and then we did one rehearsal in Philly, and but that was pretty much it. And then it wasn't until 2011 that he and I reconnected. Yeah,
well, when he finally came back and he was living in Claremont, he, I think, went to school briefly for computers, because he graduated high school really early. He was really young when he graduated. He was in college when most people were in 11th grade. So he went to Ann Arbor, and he was studying, I want to say, computer science, and he hated it and came back and just bailed on the whole college thing. But he was a computer guy. I mean, that's what he did. He could build a computer with no problem.
Wow.
But Linux is what his specialty was, and nobody uses Linux. That's really specific, and it's meant mainly for like universities. This Apple Chrome's on Linux, so it's harder to hack, although.
Okay. Right.
So he got into the computer thing, and he was still playing gigs and going out, and people were in and out, but he wasn't finding the caliber of musicians there that he did when he was in Philly. And I know that he had started doing collaborations where he was here and you guys were there.
Yep.
And I don't know how you were going back and forth with your tracks, but he always needed to have that in his life.
Yeah.
Up until the very end, he needed that in his life.
And you were in touch with him throughout all of the time. You guys stayed connected.
Yeah, we stayed connected. So he went back, like I said, and then he moved to Claremont. And, I saw him if not every week, every other week. And we talked on the phone. He would come visit me in LA. We'd go to parties, and he was a teetotaler at that point. And, he was fun to have around because he was a teetotaler. And I had 2 cats, and I was moving my apartment, and I had to get rid of the one cat. So Matt came and got the cat. So he and I had cats together. And then I had to get an extra cat because the other cat was lonely, because Matt was gone, and he came and picked up the cat. So he had our cat, my cat. He moved into his house in Claremont. In fact, when he got married, the cat was still alive.
Wow.
So, and I knew Johanna. I used to take them to and from the airport. I spent time barbecues at their house. I was at their wedding. I stayed very close with him, and through the years when he got married, and then having the kids and all that. And then, of course, I got married and had my son, and Matt was a part of that. So I invited him to my son's birthday parties, and he and my husband got along just famously.
That's great.
So I was very close with him, and towards the end, I was on the phone with him daily.
Wow.
Yeah. We didn't collaborate music-wise. We were like, oh my God, did you hear this? So we were a huge Terrence Trent D'Arby fan.
Oh yeah.
And he changed his name and is doing something different. So we were like on the phone, and then, on our iPods or whatever it was, exchanging music back and forth. So, we still had that conversation. We still were capable of a conversation, even though I wasn't that advanced in understanding the breakdown of songs or why somebody's doing it that way. I still got it. So we enjoyed our conversations, and, he needed to keep busy. And that's when I guess he started getting into that fitness thing. So Matt always had a beautiful body. He was always really fit, but he went, wow, when you see, a near 50-year-old man looking the way he did.
Oh, it was amazing. It was inspiring. I had a phone conversation with him. I was on tour, and we had just recorded a song called Medicine Man. And he was having a bad day when he called me. And I said, hey, why don't you fly to Sarasota?
Uh-huh.
I have a place here. I'm finishing up a leg of a tour I was doing at the time. And I said, stay in Sarasota with me. We'll go to Siesta Key. We'll film a video
Oh, there you
for
go.
Medicine Man.
Okay.
And he says, okay. But then he calls me an hour later. He goes, oh, I can't make it. He goes, but man, I said, listen, Matt, go out tonight. I said, there are 19, 20-year-old dudes who could only pray to have a body as good as yours.
Oh God, I know.
Go out. Just go out and he
Oh,
called me the next day and he
and
said,
thanked you.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
You know,
He got into fitness, and he was always into fitness. He would make me run. We lived on the 10th floor of our apartment, and he would make me run up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down the flights of stairs. So he was always into fitness. But when he came to California, it was something totally different. So he was into gymnastics, which is crazy. So he was doing like the pommel horse and all that.
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
Pretty insane. And I just, to see his body, how he transformed it was amazing in itself. But he was such a, Matt wasn't a free spirit, but he could be a free spirit. So he would made these wings. Did you ever see his wings?
Yes, I saw those.
Little angel wings, big angel wings. He would get on his skateboard, longboard, whatever, and he'd be skating all through the city, and he's got these wings on his back. He's bald. He's in like what are those shorts called? Like roller derby shorts.
Yep.
And no top on, maybe a vest and something, a feather in his cap. I don't know. He was out there.
Well, and I'm as we when we close out this episode, I will have a PSA. Matt's organs were donated.
Yes.
After his passing.
Indeed. His sister Annie arranged all that, and that was a wonderful thing. So I like to say Matthew lives on in all of us, but in some people a little bit more so.
A little bit more so.
And I know his sister had shared with me a while back that the gentleman who received Matthew's heart climbed Kilimanjaro. So that's pretty cool.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I think Matt he would dig that.
That's very poetic. I mean, if you think about it, it's that's because that's something Matt would have done.
Oh, totally.
He
wouldn't have walked Kilimanjaro. He would have run.
He would have
run up that thing.
And that's the thing, and I so appreciate the time that you spent sharing these stories and your insight with him. Is that, and I think that you had this as well. I mean, because of your discipline and being this ballet artist so young, that when you went to do something, you did it.
Yes.
And Matt did the same thing. So with conviction. I think that's really sums it up, is conviction.
Yeah.
Musically, fitness.
Yes.
He was
don't do it half-ass, and he would say, "Don't do that. Don't waste my time. Don't do it half-ass. Don't waste my time. You're out of here.
You're going all in, or we're not doing this at all."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was, I think that's one of the things that attracted me to him, because most people don't practice. Most people don't have that regimen to get better.
Right.
Doing the same thing over and over. I mean,
well, even on top of that what you said is absolutely true, to get better, but he was constantly evolving.
Yes.
And that might have been, that was the beautiful thing, but that could also be a scary thing for an artist to like, oh, I'm going somewhere.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, should I? And especially in the industry that we were in.
Yes.
And you saw this firsthand. It's like, oh wait, I can't go here.
Yeah.
Because I'm supposed to be this.
Right.
No matter how good I am at this.
Yes.
But he always constantly evolving.
He was evolving, because the one thing about LA, and it, is if you pigeonhole yourself into something, you're stuck there. So with his evolving and his conviction to create different sounds and do different things and think outside of the box.
Right.
He didn't want any part of you if you weren't on the same page.
Right.
He really didn't.
Yeah. He's
He
an
really
intense
did.
man.
And he was very intense. I loved him. I still love him. There are times, I'm sure you have the same thing happen where, oh, you remember something. Oh, I'll just call Matt up. And you're like, damn.
You can't do it. Yeah.
Can't do it. Yeah. So I try and keep in touch with his sister, and keep that alive. But he's alive in all of us. Everybody has a story about Matt Bradley, I'm sure.
Yes, they do. And for me, and again, I so deeply appreciate your time. He's the reason I've continued in music. The reason.
And that's good to hear. I mean,
he's the bar that was set.
Yeah, he was a big old bar. It's true. No, I get it. And I think, thank you for doing this for Matt, because it's nice to hear what everybody kind of has to say about him. I'm the backstory. I'm just kind of, the side that nobody saw, and to hear and know musically what he was capable of and did, and the opinions that people have of him. It's just great that, there's this to bring it to other people. And I thank you for that.
And I thank you so much for your time. You knew him on levels that none of us do. And you sharing your story and your time is so appreciated.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It was a pleasure.
Nadine, it's so great to see you again. And please, let's stay in touch.
Will do, for sure.
That's the beautiful thing about our technology, is that we can do that.
I'll be in touch with you in about 3 minutes.
Sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Nadine Gray. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been a celebration of Matthew Bradley's life, music, with some amazing people who have shared parts of his life. And I'm just honored to know these people and to continue our exploration into him. So thank you, everyone. And please take care. Thank you, Nadine.
Bravo. Thank you.
These are words and little lies you said to me. Had no idea what you meant, but I could tell by the tone and the look in the eyes. Funny thing about the rare second chances, we really waited it really we could. I don't think so. So you can, yeah, love it till it goes. Where it ends up is anybody's guess. Ran away too early, I'll bring it back to you. Oh, it's just at the times when everything easy, I can't say that there weren't some regrets. That's the wonder what I came out of it. I promise you sometimes I can't help myself. Lost my way, say what I say, yeah. Say you can, yeah. Love it till it goes. Where it ends up is anybody's guess. Ran away too early, I'll bring it back to you. Oh, it's just oh, it's just oh, it's just these are the words you said to me.
Every life touched by organ and tissue donation crosses a bridge between death and life, grief and meaning, hope and healing. At only 48, Matthew Bradley, loving husband, father, brother, son, and dear friend to so many, died tragically. However, his gift of life transcends his time with us and has saved dozens of lives and will improve the well-being of scores of others. You see, Matthew Bradley was an organ and tissue donor. Tragically, 19 people die every day in this country waiting for an organ donation. Advances in medicine have made it possible to save tens of thousands of lives a year through donations like those of Matthew. A living gift like that of Matt's can be your legacy. Say yes to organ and tissue donation. Go to Donate Life America at donatelife.net. and give the gift of life, just like Matt.